In this lecture, we're going to make a start on building out some more features within our app using Claude Code to generate those features. Now, the first thing we're going to do is implement a basic dashboard section where the user can select a particular date and display all the workouts logged for that date. So of course, we're looking now at the completed project or an example of what the completed project could look like. And I've already gone ahead and created some dummy data for this particular project. And we're going to try and emulate then this particular dashboard. So let's go ahead and do this then. Let's first of all get Claude Code to generate a basic dashboard for us where we have a date picker. And whenever the date is changed within the date picker, we'll also ask Claude Code to load any workouts that were logged for that particular date. So let's head on back then to VS Code. And the first thing we want to do is upload our code to a new GitHub repo because it makes sense that we create a new branch to implement this new feature. Because of course, the dashboard page is a new feature for us in this particular project. So let's head on over then to the source control tab and let's scroll to the top here. And I'm just going to add the commit message in here, just saying project setup, because all we've done so far is set up our project. So let's hit commit here. Then let's hit publish branch. And I'm going to publish this to a public repository. So you guys can actually see all of the code that I generated throughout this course. So I'm going to select public repository here. And perfect. It looks like we have our new repo all set up. Now from here, we just need to branch off of the main branch. So let's go to the more options here and let's go to branch. Then we want to create a branch from the main branch, which we're currently in. So let's select create branch and the branch name, I'm just going to call it something like dashboard page. So let's hit enter on this. Then let's hit publish branch. And now we're in a good position to actually get Claude Code to build out our dashboard page. So through this end, I'm going to use my existing Claude Code instance, but I'm going to clear the chat from the previous lectures. So let's use the /clear command here to clear the conversation. So we're starting off with a blank slate. Now from here, we're going to ask Claude Code to implement the dashboard page. So let's say then, implement a /dashboard page, which will contain a date picker that defaults to the current date. Then let's say this page will load all the logged workouts for the date displayed in the date picker. So let's leave it at that for now. And let's see what Claude Code generates for us. Now, a quick heads up. It's highly unlikely we're going to use the code that Claude Code generates off the back of this prompt. Now, the reason for this is because we haven't guided Claude Code yet on how to generate code specific for this particular code base. Remember, ideally, we want to exclusively use Shadsen UI for our UI and our components. However, we haven't really directed Claude Code yet to use Shadsen UI. So just a quick heads up, we're probably not going to use the code generated off the back of this prompt. However, I want to show you how we can heavily influence Claude Code to generate code that's more appropriate for our particular project and our particular code base. With that said, let's hit enter on this prompt and see what Claude Code comes back with. So we can see Claude Code is, first of all, trying to understand our code base. Once it's done that, then it can go ahead and implement the feature that we asked it to. So we can see Claude Code wants to create a new page.tsx file located in the dashboard directory. So this will actually create a new route within Next.js. So the /dashboard page then will be available within our project. So yes, we want to allow all edits during this session. So I'm going to select this second option here. Now we can see that Claude Code is trying to create an API endpoint to fetch workouts for a specific date. Now, I really dislike this approach because we're using the latest version of Next.js in this project. We don't need to use an API route to retrieve our data. ideally this data will be loaded via a server component. So already, without seeing any UI, I already do not like the output from Claude Code. So this is what I mean by if we don't influence the output of Claude Code is very rarely actually going to generate code appropriate for our project. However, with that said, it looks like Claude Code has finished generating. So I'm going to select this second option again to always allow the npm run lint command to be run. So I'm going to hit the second option here, and we can see there was no issues found off the back of running the linter. And we get a nice summary of the changes that Claude Code made. However, like I said, I'm really not a big fan of the back-end implementation that Claude Code has generated, but I haven't yet seen the UI. So let's take a look at the UI then. Let's create a new terminal window here. Let's run npm run dev to fire up our dev server. Then let's head on over to localhost in the browser. Then let's head on over to the /dashboard page. And it looks like we're actually getting an error within Next.js here. However, while the UI doesn't look too bad, I can already tell that the UI is not using Shadsen UI components. Now, let's see what happens if we change the date. For example, let's navigate to a date that I know doesn't have any workouts logged, and perfect. We can see that our data fetching is actually working correctly. But this is not the way I would load data within a Next.js app. Now let's quickly take a look at the issue that we're experiencing in Next.js. And we can see that this is a hydration error. And it looks like there's just a mismatch between the rendered date because we're using this toLocale date string function on our date. So that's not too big of an issue, that's easily fixable. However, like I mentioned, most of the code that Claude Code has generated for this dashboard page, I really don't like. So let's head on back then to VS Code. Let's take a look at the changes that Claude Code made. If we head on over to the source control tab, we can see a new root.ts file was added, which looks like a root handler for a GET request to retrieve all the workouts for a particular date for a particular user. Now, the really crazy thing with this is we're passing a user ID as a search param to this endpoint, which means we could potentially retrieve other users' data, and we have zero protection, and Claude Code is actually allowing this. So that's the crazy part here. This is actually incredibly insecure. So I think I've made my point clear now in that if we don't guide Claude Code and influence the output of Claude Code, then Claude Code is really not going to produce the best results for our particular use case and for our particular project. So this is a really nice segue then into creating documentation files for Claude Code to follow to heavily influence the output of Claude Code. So in the next lecture then, I'm going to show you a technique that I really like to guide Claude Code in creating document files for Claude Code to follow. So we'll take a look at how we can heavily influence the output of Claude Code in the next lecture. So first of all, from the last lecture, I'm going to discard the changes for all the files that Claude Code edited or modified. So in my particular instance here, I just have the root.ts and the page.tsx. I'm going to keep the changes for the settings.local.json file because we can see we're just going to allow npm run lint to always be run within this project. So Claude Code is not going to ask permission for that particular command. However, for the root.ts and the page.tsx, I'm just going to discard these changes. So yes, we're going to delete both of these files because these files were created off the back of the prompt in the last lecture. So now we're back again with a clean slate. So in our terminal window then, let's quit running our dev server. Let's head on over back to our Claude Code instance. Let's scroll all the way to the bottom here. Now let's clear our context by using the /clear command. So now again, we're starting with a blank slate. However, before we ask Claude Code to generate any more code, we're going to generate some document files specific to our project. So we're going to separate these into different files. For example, a UI document. We're going to have a server actions document. We're going to have a data fetching document. So essentially, we're targeting all the different layers within our app, and we're creating a document of coding standards to adhere to for that particular layer within our app. So let's start off then with the UI. Of course, we want to always use ShadCN UI for the components. So let's get Claude Code to generate a document for us of coding standards for our UI. So through this end, let's prompt Claude Code and let's say something like create a docs/ui.md file. So our documentation will be in Markdown format. And of course, we don't currently have a docs directory yet, but Claude Code should create this docs directory off the back of this prompt, as well as creating this new ui.md file. So we're going to say create a docs/ui.md file outlining the coding standards for the UI throughout this entire project. Then let's say the document should outline that only ShadCN UI components should be used for the UI in this project. Then we're going to say absolutely no custom components should be created. Only use ShadCN UI components. Now, if you remember in the last lecture as well, we also had a hydration issue, and that was regarding our date formatting. Now, there is a very popular package called datefns, which is a very nice, easy to use package to format dates. So the reason we were actually getting the hydration issue in the last lecture was because of a mismatch between the formatting for our dates, which obviously got rendered on the server, but then the client was formatting that date differently depending on the locale. However, that's not really important. My point with this is I want to also add in this UI document file or UI documentation file that all dates should be formatted via datefns. So let's add a new line here. Let's add two new lines here. Then we're going to say date formatting should be done via date-fns. So this is an npm package, which obviously would need to be installed into our app. However, we're also going to give some examples of how dates throughout our app should be formatted. So let's say then, dates should be formatted like the following. So then let's hit Shift and Enter again for a new line. And I'm going to say first, Sep 2025. Then let's say second, Org 2025. Then let's say third, Jan 2026. And then finally, let's say fourth, JUN, and let's say 2024. Just so we've got some different variations and examples of how the date should be formatted. So this actually then concludes everything I want to cover within the UI documentation file. So let's hit enter on this prompt, and Claude Code should go off then and generate this new documentation file for our UI. So we can see already we have this docs directory, we have this new ui.md file, and we have appropriate content and rules and coding standards for our UI now. So we can see we have some coding standards here for our UI. Absolutely no custom components should be created. Use only ShadCN UI components for all UI elements. And there's no exceptions to this rule. Then if we scroll down, we have the date formatting standards, outlining that the datefns library should be used for date formatting. And we have some examples of how dates should be formatted. So we can see then we have this format pattern as well for the day, the month, and the year. Now, of course, if you have any other UI coding standards that you feel is necessary to add into the UI documentation, then of course go ahead and add them in this new ui.md file. And of course, we can modify this manually if we wanted to, or if we wanted some extra changes off the back of this, we could ask Claude Code to add those extra changes in. However, I think that this UI documentation file is sufficient for our needs now. So from here, for Claude Code to actually adhere to these coding standards, we need to update our claude.md file. So again, we're going to clear the context in our Claude Code terminal window here. So let's run the /clear command. Then we're going to say, update the claude.md file to highlight that all code generated by Claude Code should always, and let's put always in capitals, should always first refer to the relevant docs file within the /docs directory. So let's hit enter on this, and we can see the changes that Claude Code has added within the claude.md file. So it's added this section here, and in fact, I'm just going to open up the claude.md file. Actually, I'm going to open it up from the source control tab so we can actually see the section that's been added. So we can see it's a pretty small section. However, the code generation guidelines outline here that this is incredibly important. When generating any code, always refer to the relevant documentation files within the /docs directory to understand existing patterns, conventions, and best practices before implementation. Now we're going to also add a bunch more docs files within the docs directory. However, I want to make sure that Claude Code is actually going to listen to this rule within the claude.md file. So a good test for this then is to ask Claude Code to generate the same dashboard that we asked it to generate in the last lecture, but we're just going to ask Claude Code to only generate the UI for the dashboard. So we're not going to ask Claude Code to generate any data fetching code or anything like that. We're going to ask Claude Code to only generate the UI. So through this end, we're going to clear our context and start with a new chat. So let's use the /clear command here to start off with a blank slate. And I'm going to close the claude.md file here. And actually, let's close all the open files just so we've got a bit of a cleaner working space here. So let's close all files. Then we're going to say, create a /dashboard page with a date picker set to the current date. This page should also show a list of workouts logged for the date within the date picker. Then we're going to say in capital letters, only generate the UI for this page. Do not generate any data fetching or server-side code just yet. Then we're going to reinforce this by saying, just focus on the UI. So let's hit enter on this prompt. And it looks like Claude Code is not actually reading our docs/ui.md file. We can see in the planning here, it's not actually read any of our documentation files. However, while it does recognize that we're using Shadson UI components, Claude Code has only recognized that from other parts of our code base, not our docs file. So I'm going to undo the changes here. So I'm going to discard this new page.tsx component. So if we scroll down, we can actually see, let's scroll all the way down again. We can tell that the docs file wasn't read because the date is being formatted via the toLocale datestring function. And it looks like Claude Code has actually generated a format date function. So let's discard these changes then for this newly created page.tsx file for our dashboard. And let's head on over to our claude.md file. And we need to explicitly mention and reference the relevant docs files within this code generation guidelines. So I'm just going to add a dash here and let's reference docs/ui.md. So now if we run /clear again to start off with a blank conversation, let's run the /clear command. Then let's rerun our previous prompt. And by the way, a quick tip here is to rerun a previous prompt. You can use the arrow keys on your keyboard to cycle through your prompt history. So I've just hit up on my keyboard here to grab the previous prompt we used. So again, I'm going to run exactly the same prompt here, and I'm going to close this claude.md file. Then let's hit enter on exactly the same prompt. And we should be able to see now, as part of the planning within Claude Code, that the docs/ui.md file has been read by Claude Code. So Claude Code knows then that it needs to follow specific guidelines and standards to generate our dashboard UI. So if we scroll down then, it looks like Claude Code wants to install the calendar and button components from Shadcn UI. So I'm going to select the second option again to always allow Claude Code to install any Shadcn UI components. So let's hit enter on the second option here. And perfect, it looks like Claude Code is also recognizing that we need to use the datefns package to format our dates. So if we scroll down then, we should be nearing the end now of this dashboard page generation. And we can see that Claude Code has given a small outline here of exactly what it's done. However, I want to see this in action within the browser. So if we quickly open up our source and app directory, we can see we have a new components directory as well with the button and calendar components from Shadcn UI. However, if we open up the dashboard and page.tsx, we should be able to see now, it looks like Claude Code has generated another helper function to format the date. However, it's using the format function from datefns. Now, in my opinion, creating an abstraction around the datefns format function is not really necessary. I think this is a bit too much over engineering. However, that's not the point. The point is, at least now Claude Code is using the datefns npm package to format our date. However, with that said, let's scroll down even further, and we should be able to see Claude Code is now referencing Shadcn UI components. So we can see a calendar component here, and if we scroll down even further, we should be able to see a button component as well. So it's also added a button to log a new workout. So with that said, let's fire up a new terminal window and let's run npm run dev to fire up our local development server. Then let's head on over back to the browser. I'm going to give localhost a quick refresh. Now then, let's head on over to the /dashboard page. And it looks like we're getting another issue here within Next.js. However, again, that's not particularly important right now. What's important is Claude Code has followed our coding standards and generated a UI using Shadcn UI components. And of course, as well, we can see this is actually dummy data. This isn't coming from our database because we said to Claude Code to only generate the UI for us. So we don't have any live data fetching or anything like that just yet. So with that said, let's open up this issue and see what we've got. And again, it looks like that this is a hydration issue. So let's simply copy this issue then and head on back to VS Code. Within our Claude Code terminal window, let's run the /clear command again to start off with a blank slate. Then let's simply paste in the error that we copied from the browser. So let's hit enter on this, and Claude Code has identified that it can see the hydration mismatch error is caused by date formatting inconsistencies between server and client. And it looks like Claude Code has proposed a fix, but now it's asking if we want to run npm run dev. However, I'm not going to run npm run dev because we already have npm run dev running in a different terminal. So I'm going to select option 3 here and say, no, I do not want to run npm run dev. However, Claude Code should have fixed this now. So let's head on back to the browser and let's give it a quick refresh. And there we go. We're no longer seeing any hydration issue for the /dashboard page. So now that we have our very basic UI all set up with our coding standards for our UI, for our /dashboard page, in the next lecture, we're going to create some coding standards for data fetching, and we're actually going to fetch our actual data from our database for the selected date within our calendar. So we'll take a look at this in the next lecture. The moment doesn't look anything like the example UI of the completed project that I've already demonstrated to you. Of course, ideally, we will have a nice drop down for the calendar. We will have a create workout button, and we will display as dark mode for our app, none of which we've actually implemented yet in our particular app. Now, don't worry, because we are going to get to that stage, and I'm going to show you a different way to generate code with Claude Code. specifically via GitHub Actions. So we'll tackle all of those UI updates via GitHub Actions with Claude Code. So it's a really exciting section of the course. However, let's continue where we left off in the last lecture, and let's come full circle now, and let's remove our dummy data here that we're rendering for our workout dashboard. And instead, we want to, first of all, generate some documentation to guide Claude Code on how to actually query data within our app. And then we're going to get Claude Code to write some code and generate some code to actually accomplish querying data within our app. So first things first, then, let's head on back to VS Code. And we first of all want to push all of our changes from the last lecture to our dashboard page branch within our repo. So I'm just going to say dashboard page UI here for the commit message. Let's hit commit, then let's hit sync changes. Let's hit OK. And now we're in a good position to generate some rules and documentation around everything to do with querying data within our app. So within our Claude Code terminal window then, let's again run /clear to start from a blank slate. And we're going to prompt Claude Code then to add a new docs file within the docs directory, specifically for data fetching. Now, for me personally, I want data fetching to be done via server components. I don't want this to be done client-side. I would much rather data fetching to be done via server components within Next.js. Additionally, I want a data layer, which will include helper functions to query for various data from our database. And those helper functions will essentially wrap the database calls via Drizzle ORM. So we've got a little bit of complexity here, and this documentation file is going to be quite a bit larger than our UI documentation file. So let's add all of this in then to our prompt. So first of all, we're going to say to Claude Code, create a new docs/data fetching.md file and highlight that all data fetching within this app should be done via server components. And if you remember, in one of the previous lectures, Claude Code actually created a route handler to query for our data. Now, I absolutely do not want any route handlers created to fetch data within this app. So we're going to highlight that as well as part of our documentation. So just like we can tell Claude Code to implement code in a certain way, it's also very useful to tell Claude Code how not to do something as well. So in this instance, we're going to say, under absolutely no circumstances should we be creating route handlers to fetch data within our app. It should all be done via server components. Now, you also may have noticed that I will periodically use capital letters for certain words to emphasize a particular point when prompting Claude Code. Now, this has been shown to actually work when prompting with these large language models. If we emphasize certain words, then these large language models are more likely to adhere to the instructions we're giving it. So with that said, we want to continue with this documentation file then. So we're going to say, data should not be fetched via route handlers, only in capital letters via server components. This is incredibly important. And actually, I'm going to add to that. So data should not be fetched via route handlers or via client components or any other way. Then we're going to say only via server components. This is incredibly important. Then let's add a new line with Shift and Enter. And we're going to say database queries must always be done via helper functions within the /data directory. These helper functions must use Drizzle ORM to query the database. And then let's put in all capital letters here. Do not use raw SQL. Then to finish off the rough draft of our rule here, I'm going to say that logged in users can only access their own data. So this is incredibly important. Of course, we don't want any user to be able to query for a different user's data. So we're going to say it's incredibly important that a logged in user can only access their own data. And then let's say they should not be able to access any other data other than their own. So let's hit enter on this and see what Claude Code comes back with for our new documentation file, specifically for data fetching. So once Claude Code has finished generating our file, let's open it up and let's inspect its contents. So we can see here that these are the data fetching guidelines. We have a core principle here, which is server components only. So this is critical. All data fetching within this application must be done via server components. This is a fundamental architectural requirement. Then we can see the allowed way to fetch data. So it's via server components, and it's the only approved method for data fetching. So prohibited data fetching methods then are via root handlers, client components, or client-side fetching with useEffect or any other way to fetch data client-side. All of these are prohibited. Then if we scroll down, we can see we also have a database query requirements. We have an outline here to use helper functions in the /data directory. And all database queries must be implemented as helper functions within this directory. And Drizzle ORM is required. We must never use raw SQL, and we must always use Drizzle ORM for all the database queries. Then if we scroll down even further, we can see some data access security. So this is where only a logged in user can only access their own data. They must not be able to access any other user's data. And then we can see we have some code snippets here and an example of some implementation. So we can see here an example here of a user workouts. So we'll have a data/user workouts.ts file. And if we scroll down, this actually looks like a really useful code snippet. So this is a get user workouts helper function where we're first of all checking to see if there's a logged in user. If there isn't, then we're going to return early from this helper function by throwing a new error. However, if there is a logged in user, we're querying our database via Drizzle ORM here, and we're passing in the user ID directly from the user ID that we grab from the session cookies that are stored server-side via Clerk. So this is all looking really good. None of this is done via the client or within the browser. This is all done server-side within server components. Then, of course, we can see an example then of calling that helper function within a server component. So we're using the get user workouts helper function, and of course, just an example snippet here of rendering those workouts. So this is a really, really good documentation file. And let's actually add this then within our Claude.md file. We need to reference this particular documentation file for Claude to actually recognize that it's a file it can use as part of the coding standards and guidelines when generating server-side code specifically for data fetching. So let's open up our Claude.md file then. And I'm just going to add a colon here at the end of implementation, just so it's a little bit more readable and a bit more obvious that these are the particular files available for Claude Code to reference when it's generating code. So with that said, I'm going to add another reference here to the docs/data-fetching.md file. So if we save this now then, let's again head on back to our Claude terminal. Let's clear the context. So let's run the /clear command and start off with another blank slate. And now we're going to say, implement the data fetching for the dashboard page and remove any dummy data within that page. Because remember, in the previous lecture, Claude Code actually added some dummy data to render just so we could see it within the UI. However, we don't want any of that dummy data. We want to actually fetch our existing data from our database. And to help Claude Code along, of course, when we're prompting, it helps to be as specific as possible within our prompts. So I'm going to say here, implement the data fetching for the dashboard page. And actually, I'm going to say implement the data fetching for workouts for the currently logged in user for the dashboard page and remove any dummy data within that page. So let's hit enter on this prompt and see what Claude Code comes back with. We should be able to see, as part of the planning stage, we should be able to see Claude Code now referencing our new documentation file for our data fetching coding standards. So perfect. It looks like Claude Code has indeed read our data fetching documentation, and now Claude Code should create a helper function to fetch the workouts for the currently logged in user. So if we scroll to the top here, we're going to wait for Claude Code to finish generating, but we should see in real time all the files and folders that Claude Code is going to generate off the back of this prompt. Now, one important thing to note here is, as part of my prompt here, Claude Code has actually picked up that we're using Clerk for authentication, which is actually going to bring us on to the third documentation file that we're going to create, which is an auth documentation file, specifically outlining that Clerk is used for authentication all throughout this app. However, with that said, let's scroll down then and let's check to see the code that Claude Code is generating. We can see now we have a new data directory. We have a user workouts file, which should contain then a helper function to get workouts for a particular user. And perfect. This is exactly what Claude Code has generated. We can see Claude Code is still generating in the terminal. However, this helper function looks like exactly what we need. We need to pass in a date to query for the currently logged in user's workouts for that particular date. And this is actually looking really good. We can see here from the workouts table, we're querying for all of those workouts. However, it looks like it's doing a get all for the workouts for a particular user and then filtering via code for the workouts for a particular date. Now, of course, I don't particularly like this. Ideally, we would just implement filtering directly within our database query. However, this is actually a pretty good start. We can see as well, there's a couple more helper functions that Claude Code has generated, and we can see it's actually just one more. So it's a get user workout with exercises, and this will be querying for all the exercises belonging to a particular workout. Of course, we're not there at that stage yet. We're still building out our workouts query. However, it looks like Claude Code is finished. So let's take a look in our source control tab and see what changes Claude Code has made. So we can see Claude Code has created a user workouts file with some helper functions to query our database via Drizzle. And we can see a new calendar client component, which looks like it's just rendering the calendar where we can select a particular date from the calendar. Then it looks like Claude Code has modified our main dashboard page because remember, all data within our app should be queried via server components. So previously, Claude Code actually created our dashboard page as a client component. So it's updated this then, so the dashboard page is now a server component, and it looks like as well that it's querying for this data server side. So all this data fetching is happening within the server component. So we can see here the get user workouts helper function call, passing in today's date. So with that said, let's head on back to the browser then. Let's give our /dashboard page a quick refresh. And it looks like I'm getting an internal server error here. This is likely because I need to rerun npm run dev, just because there's been a few files updated and added off the back of our latest prompt. So let's head on then back over to VS Code. Let's open up our dev server terminal. Let's hit Control and C to quit running this dev server. Then let's run npm run dev. Then we can head on back to the browser. Let's give our /dashboard page a quick refresh now. And perfect. We saw that loading state. We can see we have no workouts logged for the current date. However, I know for a fact that there are workouts logged for the 23rd of September. So it looks like at the moment, whenever I select a date within the calendar, this data is not loading. However, it looks like we're nearly there with our dashboard page because we are actually trying to fetch some data for the current date. However, we just don't have any workouts logged for this date. So in the next lecture there, we're going to continue finishing off our main dashboard page and hooking up whenever we update the date within the calendar, ideally, we will also query for all of the workouts for that particular date. So we'll take a look at finishing all of this off in the next lecture, the appropriate data for that particular date. So to do that then, let's head on back to VS Code, and we're going to again start off with a blank slate. So let's use the /clear command here to clear the context and start off with a blank slate. Now, if you weren't sure the best way to accomplish this particular task, then it's at this point that you could go back into planning mode, back and forth with Claude Code, to see what options you have available to load data via server components for a particular date, especially whenever a date is selected or changed within the calendar. Now, I already know how I want to do this, but I'm going to assume that we don't know how to do this, or we want Claude Code to present us with some different options on how to do this. Now, it's at this point as well, I'm going to introduce you to another mode within Claude Code, and that is the thinking mode. So remember, right at the start of the course, we actually disabled thinking mode, but to enable thinking mode, we can enable it via two different ways. So the first way is to either hit Option and T on our keyboard if we're on Mac, or Alt and T on our keyboard if we're on Windows. And we can see we have this toggle here to toggle thinking mode on or off. So all we need to do is make sure that thinking mode is enabled. Then we can see thinking mode has been turned on. Or the other way is we can run the /config command to open up the configuration panel. And we should be able to see if we scroll up here, let's make this window a little bit bigger. We can see we have thinking mode. So we can hit enter on here to update the value for thinking mode. And we can see here the value is toggling between true and false. And of course, we want to set it to true. So let's escape out of this then. And whenever we enable thinking mode within Claude Code, this will trigger Claude Code to go into more of a deep thinking mode. So it's actually going to use up more of our tokens and our context window. However, the generated code or the generated plan when using thinking mode usually results in a higher quantity output. Now, I don't want Claude Code to generate code just yet, so I'm going to switch out of edit mode here. So let's hit Shift and Tab to cycle into the default mode. So with that said, let's start typing our prompt. Let's say, I want you to outline a plan on how to fix the issue in the /dashboard page. And then we may as well actually tag the relevant file. So let's go at here, then let's go source /app/dashboard/page.tsx, where whenever a new date is selected in the calendar, the data isn't currently loading for that particular date. Now, quickly before we hit enter on this prompt, I want to quickly explain what thinking mode is. So whenever we have thinking mode enabled, Claude Code will generally create a higher quality plan first before even starting to generate any code. So generally, thinking mode is ideal for more complex tasks, especially when Claude Code needs to generate code between multiple files. However, the downside is thinking mode is a lot slower and it uses up more of our context window because Claude Code is doing more planning before producing any code. So Claude Code will often create a larger plan, which means then by extension, we often get cleaner code with fewer bugs, and the output is usually of a higher quality. So essentially, Claude Code reasons with itself to produce a higher quality result. So with that said, let's hit enter on this prompt now then, and we can see, if we scroll to the top here, we can see Claude Code is now thinking. So the user is asking me to analyze the dashboard page and outline a plan to fix an issue where selecting a new date in the calendar doesn't load data for that particular date. So it's going to check all the relevant files. And if we scroll down, we should be able to see then that Claude Code is going to create a comprehensive plan to fix the date selection issue. So if we just increase the window for our terminal a little bit bigger here, we can see already that Claude Code has presented us with some approaches for the solution. So if we scroll up then and actually check once Claude Code has finished generating its plan, if we scroll up to the top here, we can see it's outlined a plan to fix the dashboard date selection issue. So it's got a problem analysis here. So the current issue is that whenever we change the date within the calendar, it doesn't communicate it with the server component. And actually, it can't communicate it with the server component. That's not how client and server components work within Next.js. So if we scroll down, then we can see the root cause is that the client component and server component are isolated. So there is no way to communicate from a client component to a server component. So that's just the way Next.js is. And of course, it does make sense if you already know about Next.js, but client components can't communicate with server components. With that said, the solution is a URL search params approach. Now, this is the approach that I would have taken, and this is the approach that I think is best and is probably the only approach we should be taking. So we can see Claude Code has analyzed more of our issue and more of our code base to actually produce the best result for the issue we're facing and the best solution for the issue we're facing. So if we scroll down then, we should be able to see the files that it wants to modify. So it wants to modify the page.tsx server component to accept search params, and then it wants to modify the calendar and syncing the calendar selection with the URL params. So let's hit Shift and Tab on our keyboard again to cycle through to edit mode. So let's make sure now we have edit mode enabled, and then let's actually get Claude to implement this fix. So let's say this looks great. Implement these changes. So let's hit enter on this, and we can see Claude Code is modifying our dashboard page.tsx server component, and we can see all the highlighted green code is code that's added, and all the highlighted red code is code that will get removed. So once Claude Code has finished them, this all should be working now. So we can see Claude Code has given us a little description of how this works. So whenever a user selects a date in the calendar, the URL updates with the search param date in the URL, followed by the date formatted like so. So it's YYYYMMDD. So then whenever we navigate to the dashboard page with this particular search param, our dashboard server component will read the date from the URL and fetch the workout data for that specific date. So this is all looking really good. So while this at first glance looks correct, let's actually check this out in the browser. So let's make sure we have a dev server running within a new terminal window here. So I've already got a dev server up and running. So let's head on back then to the browser. Let's give our /dashboard page a quick refresh. And again, because some files have been changed off the back of our prompt within Claude Code, it looks like we're going to need to rerun our development server. So let's head on back then to VS Code. Let's quit running our dev server with Control and C in the terminal. Then let's rerun npm run dev. Then let's head on back to the browser and let's give our /dashboard page a quick refresh. And this is looking good so far. So whenever we navigate to just /dashboard, our app defaults to the current date. However, if we select a date in the calendar, it looks like this is working. We can see that the URL updates. However, probably because I'm in a different time zone to UTC, the date that I'm selecting actually selects the previous date. However, I'm going to select the 24th here in my calendar, which will actually select the 23rd apparently because I'm in a different time zone. We are going to fix this, don't worry. But the reason I want to select 24 here to load the data for the 23rd of September is because I know I have workouts logged or a workout logged for the 23rd of September. So we can see here we have a current workout logged for the 23rd of September. Now I think as well I have a workout logged for the 12th. So if I select the 13th here, I think it might actually be the 13th then. So if I select the 14th here to select the 13th, I know this is very confusing. This is a bug that we need to fix. However, we can see that we do have another workout logged for the 13th of September. So this is all looking really good. So from here, we just need to fix this one last issue, and that is the time zone issue. Whenever we select a date, it looks like it's selecting the previous day for me because currently it's nearly 6 a.m. in the physical location where I am now. However, UTC is 8 hours behind, I think. So the current date for me is the 25th of September. However, in UTC time, it's the 24th of September. So it's a day behind. So let's go ahead and fix this time zone issue then. I'm pretty sure it's a time zone issue. So let's head on back then to VS Code and let's open up our Claude terminal again. And again, I'm going to clear the conversation and start off with a blank slate. So let's use the /clear command here. Then again, I'm going to reference the source/app/dashboard/page.tsx. And I think as well, I'm going to reference the calendar component. So let's reference as well the @source/app/dashboard/calendar client.tsx. Then I'm going to say there is an issue with the calendar. Whenever I select a date, the previous date is selected. For example, if I select 25th September in the calendar, the selected date changes to the 24th of September. Then I'm just going to drop the potential issue that it might be a time zone issue. So I'm going to say, could this be a time zone issue? So let's hit enter on this prompt now, and hopefully Claude Code will propose a solution for the issue I'm facing within my calendar component. So we can see Claude Code is thinking now, and it's saying, looking at the code, if we scroll to the top here, looking at the code, this is indeed a time zone issue. Let me create a to-do list to plan and fix this problem. So we can see the problem is in both files. So it's in the calendar client component and our page.tsx server component. So we can indeed see that Claude Code has recognized that this is a time zone issue. However, if we scroll down there, it looks like Claude Code has already implemented the solution within my code base. So let's actually test this out in the browser. So before we head on over to the browser, let's rerun our dev server. So let's quit running our dev server with Control and C in the terminal. And then let's rerun npm run dev. Then let's head on over back to the browser. Let's give it a quick refresh. And I've given it a quick refresh on the 23rd of September. And it looks like on initial load, this is actually working. So if I try and navigate then to the 22nd within the URL or the 21st, it looks like it's all working via the URL. However, let's see what happens when I click on a particular date and this still isn't working. So whenever I'm clicking on a particular date, this issue still exists. So let's head on back to Claude Code, and I'm going to still keep the context of the chat we've been working with. So let's say then in the same chat window here, without clearing the context, let's say this all works if I manually type into the URL the date that I want to load. However, whenever I click on a new date within the calendar, the issue still exists. So let's hit enter on this. And apparently the issue is in the handle date select function, and Claude Code has already proposed a solution and updated our code appropriately. So we can see here, when the calendar component passes a date object to handle date select, that date object is already in local time zone, but then the to ISO string dot split converts it back to UTC, causing the same time zone shift problems. So if we scroll down then, it looks like Claude Code has finished generating its fix. So let's rerun our dev server again. So let's head on back to our dev server terminal. Then let's rerun npm run dev. Then let's head on back to the browser. Let's give it a quick refresh for our /dashboard page. Now let's click on a date within the calendar, and this is all looking really good. This seems to all be working as expected and all working correctly. So I'm just going to give it a quick refresh for a random date I've selected in the calendar. And great, this is all working as expected. So from here then, I think we're in a good position to move on to creating a new workout. So this is where we're going to need to create another documentation file on how Claude Code should generate our code specifically for data mutations within our app. So we've already generated a documentation file for data fetching. However, we also need one for data mutations because I want Claude Code to only use Next.js server actions for mutating data. So with that said, in the next lecture then, we're going to take a look at everything to do with data mutations, and we're going to implement the new workout page and the new workout form. In this lecture, we're going to make a start on the create new workout feature. But before we can do that, I think it makes sense that we start working from a new branch. So at the moment, we've been working from the dashboard page branch. However, because this is a new feature we're going to implement now, I think it makes sense that we create a new branch to work from. So in this lecture, we're going to get Claude Code to automate this entire process for us. So we're going to get Claude Code to merge the dashboard page branch into the main branch, and off the back of that, deal with any merge issues that may arise from merging the dashboard page into the main branch. Then we'll get Claude Code to create a new branch that we can work out of for the create workout page feature. So to do this then, let's head on back to our code. And we first of all want to push the changes from the last lecture to the dashboard page branch. So I'm going to add a commit message in here and just say finish dashboard page. Then let's hit commit and sync changes. Then let's hit OK. And now I think it makes sense that we first of all merge our dashboard page branch into the main branch. I know if we were working on a live project here, we would likely be pushing the dashboard page branch into a dev branch. But just for the sake of this course and to keep things a little bit more simple, we don't actually have a dev branch. So we're going to merge the dashboard page branch into the main branch. And then we're going to create a new branch off of the main branch for the create workout page and the create workout feature. Now, we could do all of this manually if we wanted to. However, I'm going to get Claude Code to do all of this, all without doing any of this manually. So we're just going to prompt Claude Code to do this for us. And within our Claude Code terminal window, let's run /clear here to start off with a blank slate. Then I want Claude Code to first tell me the steps it's going to take for the merging of the dashboard page branch and for creating a new branch for the create workout feature. So I'm going to tell Claude Code not to implement anything just yet, but just give me a plan of what it's going to do off the back of this prompt. So let's say then, give me a plan on how you would merge the dashboard page branch into the main branch, then resolve any merge issues and create a new branch off of the main branch called create workout page. Do not implement anything just yet. Just give me a plan and outline. So let's hit enter on this prompt. And we can see already Claude Code has grabbed a list of our branches for this particular repo. So of course, we just have the main and dashboard page branch at the moment. We can see as well that Claude Code has recognized that our local branch, our local dashboard page branch is up to date with the origin and up to date with the repo, which means we don't have any new code to commit. Then we can see the commit logs for this dashboard page branch. And if we scroll down, then Claude Code has done a diff here between the main and dashboard page to see the changes between each branch. And then it looks like Claude Code wants to now switch to the main branch. So I'm just going to select this second option here to always allow Claude Code to run the git checkout command. So let's select the option here. And it looks like because I selected that second option to always allow the git checkout command, it's actually updated the settings.local.json file, which now means I have some changes in the dashboard page branch. So I need to push these changes before we can switch branch to the main branch. However, let's scroll to the top here and let's see what Claude Code recommends for our merge and branch creation plan. So we can see it's outlined the plan here. We can see the current branch here, the target branch is main. We have some uncommitted changes, of course, because I selected that second option to always allow the git checkout command to be run by Claude Code. However, we can see a step-by-step plan here. So pre-merge preparation, it's going to handle uncommitted changes. So commit or stash our new changes in our settings.local.json file. It's going to update the branches. Then it's going to switch to the main branch and verify a clean working state. Then merge the dashboard page into the main branch. Resolve any merge issues off the back of that merge. Then if we scroll down, it's going to verify that there are no build errors. It's going to run the linter to check to see if there are any errors or code that isn't adhering to our linting rules. Then it's going to push the merge changes into the main branch. And if we scroll down even further, it's then going to create that new create workout page branch. So because Claude Code has already analyzed our branches, it's outlining some potential merge conflicts here. So based on the file changes, the potential conflict areas are low risk. Most changes are new files, but we have some files which are medium risk, which is the package.json and the package.log.json. However, that shouldn't actually be an issue with our particular project. And another low risk one is the claude.md file. Now again, I don't think that's actually going to be an issue. But the really cool thing is Claude Code also has a rollback plan just in case there's some issues that it can't fix, for example, then it's just going to roll back to where we started off. So we're not actually breaking anything. So with that said, this looks like a pretty solid plan. So let's go ahead and execute this plan. So let's say, okay, great. Now implement this plan. So let's hit enter on this. And Claude Code should then go step by step through the plan. And we should end up then with hopefully no merge conflict and a new branch to work out of called create workout page. And it looks like we're being prompted again to give permission to Claude Code to run a particular command. And in this case, it looks like it's the git add command. So again, I'm going to select the second option here. And again, this is going to mean that we have another change in our settings.local.json file. So it's going to have to continually commit these changes until we have no more commands to auto accept for Claude Code. Now, to get around this, we could just run this command once rather than continually adding these commands to the settings.local.json. But I want to always add them to the settings.local.json to actually give Claude Code a little bit of complexity here and to give Claude Code some hurdles. So if we're continually adding to the settings.json file, that means Claude Code isn't expecting that there's more and more changes going to be made during this plan. So I'm going to continually select the second option here, and these changes will always be added then to the settings.local.json. And again, I'm going to select the second option here to always allow the git fetch command to be run within Claude Code. So I'm going to select the second option here. And again, this should update our settings.local.json file. And perfect, it looks like it's gone through phase 1 without any issues. So it looks like it continually committed those changes for the settings.local.json. And now it looks like we've switched to our main branch here. And now within step 2 or phase 2, Claude Code wants to go through the merge process. So it's going to merge the dashboard page branch into the main branch. So again, I'm going to select this second option here just because I know this git merge command is now going to be added to the Claude settings JSON file. So again, this is going to create a little bit of a hurdle for Claude Code. So the whole reason I'm doing this is so I can show you how Claude Code is going to iterate upon itself and how it's actually going to deal with a few hurdles while executing this plan. So again, I'm going to select the second option here, which means then our settings.local.json file is going to be updated, which means these changes need to be committed first to this branch before we can do any merging. So we can actually see here, I need to handle the local changes in main branch first before merging. So again, I'm going to select the second option here to always allow the git add command to be run on our behalf within Claude Code. So again, this git add command is going to be added to the settings.local.json file. So again, this is another file change which needs to be committed to the main branch first. So I'm going to select the second option again, and we have another dialog asking if we want to run the git commit command. So I'm going to select the second option again. So this will be another change to the settings.local.json file. And it looks like we actually have a merge conflict for our settings.local.json file. So it looks like then Claude Code is going into phase 3 to try and resolve these merge conflicts. So it's saying here, I have a merge conflict in settings.local.json as expected. I need to resolve it by combining both sets of permissions. So this is exactly what we want to do. So again, I'm going to allow all edits during the session. So I'm going to select the second option here. We can see now Claude Code is trying to resolve these merge conflicts. And it looks like it has resolved those merge conflicts. And both the build and the lint passed successfully, which means now our main branch should be up to date with everything from the dashboard page branch. And now Claude Code wants to create this new branch called create workout page. So again, when I select this second option here, I'm going to always allow the git push command to be run within Claude Code, which means our settings.local.json file will be updated again. So I'm going to select the second option again. And perfect, Claude Code has finished executing its plan. And judging by the implementation summary here, it looks like everything succeeded. However, of course, let's confirm this by heading on over back to the browser. So before we can do that, let's open up a new terminal window here and let's rerun npm run dev. Then let's head on over back to the browser. Let's give our /dashboard page a quick refresh. And perfect, nothing has actually changed, which means everything is all working as expected, and our branch merge and branch creation was all executed successfully. So from here, we're in a good position to start building out our create new workout feature and our create new workout page. But before we can do that, it makes sense that we create some documentation files around auth and data mutations. So we'll take a look in the next lecture at creating the relevant documentation files before then moving on to actually implementing our create new workouts page. In this lecture, we're going to create an auth and data mutations documentation file to better guide Claude Code in both of those areas and layers within our app, before then moving on to actually creating the create new workouts functionality, which of course will indeed include data mutations. So it would include inserting into our database a new workout. But first of all, in this lecture, we're going to focus on creating the necessary documentation files for Claude Code to follow. So let's head on back then to VS Code. And within our Claude Code terminal here, remember we're working now out of the create workout page branch, but we want to start off with a blank slate. So let's use the /clear command here to clear our conversation history and start off with a blank slate. So now then we want to create two new documentation files. Let's start off with the first one, and the first one will be the auth file. So in here, let's say create a new auth.md documentation file in the /docs directory. Then we're going to say this file should highlight the coding standards for everything to do with auth in this app, specifically that this app uses Clerk for authentication. Now I'm going to show you another cool little trick here with Claude Code, and that is while Claude Code is working, we don't necessarily need to wait for it to finish before we get Claude Code to do something else within our app. So for example, before I hit enter on this prompt, we could do this one of two ways. We could queue a bunch of prompts. So as soon as I hit enter on this prompt, I could type out another prompt and hit enter on that, and that will queue the second prompt. So as soon as the first prompt has finished executing, the second prompt will execute right afterwards. However, we can also have multiple instances of Claude Code running at the same time and modifying our code at the same time. Now, while this is possible, and this is exactly what we're going to do now, I don't recommend that you do this often when working on the same feature within your app. So it's absolutely fine to have multiple instances of Claude Code running to implement different parts of your app. But the potential issue is if you have multiple instances of Claude Code running, then Claude Code could trip up, and these multiple instances of Claude Code could potentially modify the same file. So obviously that's not a good situation to have. And of course, that would not result in the best outputs from Claude Code. However, we're going to be creating two separate files here. So I'm going to show you that it is indeed possible to have two instances of Claude Code running at the same time without having to wait for the first prompt to finish before we can run a second prompt. So I'm going to open up a new terminal window here. Remember, I haven't hit enter yet on this first prompt, but I'm just going to rename this terminal window to, let's just put Claude 1 in here, and let's make this a little bit bigger. So we have Claude 1 here, and let's rename this second terminal, or it's the third terminal for me, but let's call this Claude 2. So this is the second Claude terminal window. So let's open up the Claude 2 terminal window and let's fire up Claude Code by running the Claude command. Then let's start typing out our prompt to create our data mutations documentation file. So our first Claude instance will create the auth documentation file, and our second Claude instance will create the data mutations documentation file. So let's say then create a data mutations.nd documentation file for the coding standards for everything to do with data mutations in this app. So then let's say specifically data mutations must be done via helper functions within the source/data directory, which wrap database calls via drizzle ORM. Then because this is a Next.js app, I only want data mutations to be done via server actions or server functions as they're known in React. So there's actually two different namings for the same thing within Next.js and React. So it's server actions and server functions. They're exactly the same thing. However, I'm used to saying server actions, so I'm just going to refer to them as server actions throughout this course. However, again, that's not particularly important. What's important is we want all data mutations to be done via server actions, not via any other way. So we're going to say all data mutations must be done via server actions within co-located files named actions.ts. So we're actually guiding Claude Code then on where to place these server actions within our code. So for example, when we create our page to insert a new workout into our database, so the create workout page, we will likely have a new directory in the app directory here, which will resemble a root in our app. So let's say it's new-workout. So then within that new-workout directory, we will have an actions.ts file because it's going to be co-located to the functionality or to the component that's actually going to call that server action. So with that said, to finish off this prompt, I want to make sure that all parameters for server actions have types associated with them, and they must not use the form data type. Now, the reason for this is because these large language models tend to use the form data type whenever they create server actions. So this has just been my experience specifically with Next.js regarding large language models generating code. So I want to make sure I add this in to my coding standards. So let's say all server actions params must be typed and should not have the form data type. Now, one thing I really like to do as well within server actions is validating any arguments that get passed to the server actions via Zod. So let's add this into our prompt as well. So let's say all server actions must validate the arguments passed to them via Zod. So this actually concludes then the prompt to create the data mutations documentation file. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit enter on this prompt. Then as soon as I've hit enter on this prompt, I'm going to hit enter on the prompt within our first Claude Code instance. So let's go ahead and do this then. Let's hit enter on our data mutations prompt, and then let's head on back to our auth prompt and let's hit enter on that. So we can see now Claude Code is actually going ahead and creating documentation files for our data mutations and our auth at exactly the same time. So we can see the auth one was created first, and it's actually finished before the data mutations documentation file was finished. And yes, I do want to allow all edits during this session, so I'm going to select the second option here. But hopefully now you can see that we're not just limited to just one instance of Claude Code running at one time. We can have multiple instances of Claude Code running if we wanted to. However, I will say that I don't particularly take this approach. I know that some developers do take this approach. That's why I wanted to highlight it to you in this particular lecture, where they have multiple instances of Claude Code running at once, and each instance is implementing something different within the app. So this is all happening at exactly the same time. However, my preference is to take things a little bit slower and just have one instance of Claude Code running at one time. Now, with that said, there is one caveat to this, and that is whenever we create a new instance of Claude Code, only that new instance will be connected to our IDE. So we can see this blue circle here means that this particular instance of Claude Code is connected to our IDE, which means this instance has access to, for example, selected lines of code within an open file, but the first instance does not have that. So it's been disconnected from our IDE. So we can only have one instance connected to our IDE at once. So this only really matters if we wanted to add specific context to our prompt via open files, and that context being automatically added to our prompt. For example, if we had 5 lines of code selected. Now, of course, we can still tag different files from our code base within our prompt using the @ symbol. So that's not too much of a big deal. However, I did want to mention that caveat. And also, I just want to reiterate that this is not the approach I usually take, having multiple instances of Claude Code running. I just much prefer having one instance of Claude Code running at once. So with that said, let's actually take a look at the documentation files that were created. So we have this auth documentation file. We can see that the authentication provider uses Cloak for authentication and user management. And if we scroll down, we can see some implementation standards within client components to grab the currently logged in user, or if there is no currently logged in user. And if we scroll down, we can see the implementation within server components. Now we have an example here of a protected page, and we have some root protection example as well within our Next.js middleware. And it looks like as well, Claude Code created some rules for API routes. So this is good to have within our documentation, even though we're not using API routes throughout this course. So this app doesn't use API routes. However, it is helpful to have an example of how to protect an API route or grab the currently logged in user within an API route using Cloak. So with that said, let's quickly take a look at the data mutations file. And we can see this is the document outlining the coding standards and patterns for data mutations in our application. If we scroll down, we can see we have server actions here must be added into an actions.ts file. We can see that the data helpers must be in source/data and contain a business logic and database operations. And we're using Drizzle ORM for type-safe database interactions. And then we can scroll down here and we can see that this is an example of the file structure that we expect server actions to be in. So we can see here we have source app workouts actions.ts. So this is exactly what I wanted Claude Code to add in this documentation file. Then if we scroll down, we can see we have some parameter typing as well. We must not use the form data type. And if we scroll down, we can see an example of incorrect usage and some correct usage with validation with Zod as well. So this is all looking really good. Now, I'm not going to review this entire file because it's a pretty long file. However, if we scroll down, we can see we have a nice little summary here of best practices and anti-patterns to avoid. So this is all looking really good, which means we're in a good position now to move on to actually implementing our create new workouts functionality. So we'll take a look at this in the next lecture. D had datamutations.md documentation files. So we need to reference these. If we open up our claude.md file, as part of our documentation file references here, we need to add those two new files. So let's add /docs/auth.md and /docs/datamutations.md. So if we save this now, we're in a good position to prompt Claude Code to generate our create workout page and our create workout functionality. So let's refer then back to our Claude Code terminal window. Let's run /clear. So we're starting off with a blank slate. Then let's say something like create a new page at /dashboard/workout/new. So this is the type of routing structure I'm going to go for here. So everything will be under our /dashboard route. Then we will have /workout/new for logging a new workout. Or if you want to edit a particular workout, we will have a /workout/ followed by the workout ID. So this is a type of route structure I'm going to go for. So with that said, we want to create a new page at /dashboard/workout/new with a form to create a new workout. Now we could add some extra information to this prompt, but because we've got our documentations file now all set up for every layer within our app, let's just see what Claude Code does with this pretty generic prompt. So we haven't asked it to just implement the UI or just to implement the server-side implementation of creating a new workout. But hopefully, because we have our documentation files, Claude Code should know that it needs to create a form, ideally using Shadcn UI components. Then it needs to create a server action, which whenever the form is submitted, will call that server action. And then that server action in turn will call a helper function from the /data directory. So we'll have our helper functions within our /data directory. And of course, those helper functions then wrap our database calls via Drizzle. So hopefully Claude Code picks up on this. So let's hit enter on this pretty generic prompt and let's see what Claude Code comes back with. So we can see Claude Code is reading all of our relevant documentation files to see how it should actually go about implementing our prompt. So we can see already as part of the implementation off the back of our prompt, Claude Code needs to install some missing Shadcn UI components. So we can see, because we allowed Claude Code to always run the npx shadcn @latest add command, we should be able to actually find this if we open up our .claude and settings.local.json file. If we make this window a little bit bigger here, if we scroll down, we should be able to see this particular line here. We're always allowing Claude Code to run this command on our behalf in our project. So we don't need to always give permission to Claude Code to run this command, which is why if we scroll down again, we can see that Claude Code already ran this command to install a bunch of Shadcn UI components that were missing in our project. However, now we're being prompted to allow edits during this session. So yes, I'm going to allow all edits during this session. So let's select this second option here. And so far, at first glance, this implementation looks really good. So we can see if we scroll to the top here, we have a new file that Claude Code has created. So we can find this file at source/app/dashboard/workout/new/actions.ts. So this is the exact pattern that we outlined in our documentation file specifically for data mutations and server actions. So this is exactly how we want Claude Code to implement our server actions. So if we scroll down even further then, we can see that Claude Code has created a new workouts file within a data directory. So this will be responsible for everything to do with workouts, specifically for creating a workout. So again, we have a new addition to this data layer, which is perfect. This is exactly what we wanted Claude Code to do. So if we scroll down even further, we can see a new page component was added for the /workout/new page. And again, if we scroll down even further, we should be able to see it looks like there was some linting issues off the back of the code that was generated by Claude Code. So if we scroll up slightly, we can see Claude Code ran the linter and there was some issues with the linter, so it's gone ahead and tried to fix those issues. So if we scroll down even further, then we should be able to see Claude Code has finished generating its code off the back of our prompt, and it's actually followed exactly what we outlined in our documentation files. So we can see here, Claude Code created a server action with proper Zod validation, with type-safe parameters. It also has error handling with consistent result format and authentication check using Clerk. Then we have a data helper for database operations using Drizzle ORM. And we have a form that uses Shadcn UI components. We have React Hook form with a Zod resolver for validation. We have proper error handling and loading states. And the client-side form calls the server action that was created off the back of our prompt. So at first glance, this all looks perfect. Now, it's really important to note that if we hadn't have added the documentation files specific to each layer in our app, then I can almost guarantee that Claude Code would not have implemented the solution off the back of our prompt in this particular way. So we've given Claude Code a proper and rigid structure to follow, and it's gone ahead and done that, but only because we've given it guidance to do that. So that said, from here then, before we check out the code and take a look at the actual code that Claude Code generated, let's take a look in the browser. So I'm going to rerun then. I'm going to head on over to my second terminal window here. Let's hit Control and C on our keyboard to quit running the dev server. Then let's rerun npm run dev. And let's head on back then to the browser. Let's give localhost 3000 a quick refresh. Now, one thing that's immediately obvious to me is whenever we select a date that has a workout logged, we have no button in the dashboard to create a new workout for that particular day. However, if a day doesn't have a workout logged, then we do have this button to create a new workout. However, at the moment, this button looks like it's not actually hooked up to anything. But we should be able to access in the URL the /dashboard/workout/new page. And perfect. This was the page that was just created off the back of our prompt. We can see we have a workout name and a start date and time. So let's see what happens then when we try and log this new workout. So I'm just going to say example workout here for the workout name. Let's take note of the date that this workout was created for, because obviously we want to try and see this in our dashboard. So this is the 26th of September 2025. I'm going to hit create workout, and it looks like it's failed. But at least we can see some feedback within our UI to actually show that the workout creation had failed. So with that said, let's head on over back to VS Code. We should be able to see, we can see some console logs here. We can see failed to create workout. The error is a next redirect error. So it looks like Claude Code is trying to redirect within a server action, which we can't actually do within server actions in Next.js. At least we can't do it without throwing an error. So to fix this is really simple. We can simply copy the error message that was console logged within our terminal window here. Let's head on over to Claude Code. Then let's simply paste in that error within Claude Code. Now we could say as well if we wanted to fix this error, but I'm just simply going to paste in the error. Claude Code should know that we want to fix this error. So let's hit enter on this. And we can see that this is indeed the issue. The issue is that redirect throws a special Next.js error to perform the redirect, but our try-catch block is catching it and treating it as an error. So Claude Code needs to fix the server action to handle redirects properly. So if we scroll down, we can see the removed lines of code highlighted in red and the added lines of code highlighted in green. So if we scroll down there, we should be able to see that Claude Code has fixed the issue. So it's restructured the server action to handle validation and authentication outside of the try-catch and only wrap the database operation in a try-catch. Now, because I'm a Next.js developer, I already know that this probably isn't going to work. This solution isn't going to work because usually we wouldn't redirect from a server action. We would usually await a response from the server action on the client, and then we would redirect client side based on that response. However, let's see if this all works. Let's head on back to the browser then. Let's give our create new workout page a quick refresh. Again, I'm going to put example workout here for the workout name. Let's hit create workout. And again, we're seeing this error because, like I mentioned, we generally don't use the redirect function within server actions within Next.js. So let's head on then back to VS Code. Let's open up our dev server terminal window and let's scroll down. And because I already know the error here, I could quite easily fix this either manually or via Claude Code, specifically mentioning that the redirect function shouldn't be used within server actions. So let's copy this message again then, and let's head on back to our Claude Code terminal window. Let's paste in that error message. Let's add a few new lines with Shift and Enter. Then let's say the redirect should be done client side, not within the server action. So let's hit enter on this. And this would be a good rule to add as well into our documentation file. So we can see Claude Code has tripped up twice there by adding a redirect within the server action, where we shouldn't be adding that redirect within the server action. So this is actually a good segue into another tip I have when using Claude Code, or in general when using large language models, where we can guide the large language models via documentation files or rules. If you find that Claude Code is repeating the same mistakes, then it's a good idea to outline these mistakes within the documentation files and simply say, don't implement code in that specific way. So for example, we're going to add into our documentation file specific for data mutations within our server actions section. We're going to say, never call the redirect function within server actions. Redirects should always be done client side. So with that said, if we scroll down, we should be able to see Claude Code should have updated now our client logic. We can see this highlighted section here. So this is actually the client side form here for a new workout. And we can see if the result was successful, we'd navigate to client side then to the /dashboard page. So let's test this out again then. Let's head on back to the browser. Let's give it one last refresh on our create new workout form. Then again, I'm going to put example workout in here. Let's keep the start date the same. Let's hit create workout and perfect. It looks like the workout was created. Ideally, we'll have a nice little toast message in the bottom right hand side, for example, just to inform the user that their workout was logged. And ideally, we will redirect the user back to the dashboard page, but for the date where they logged that new workout. So my new workout was logged on the 26th of September. So ideally, we will navigate the user back to the 26th of September. And it looks like actually my previous example workouts were also logged. So the example workouts were logged, but then after they were inserted into the database, it looks like at that point, we were facing our error within our Next.js server action. So the previous example workouts were indeed logged. However, with that said, it looks like everything is working now. We do have a few loose ends we need to tie up, which we are going to tackle in a couple of lectures' time. However, in the next lecture, I want to move on to actually being able to click on through to a particular workout and adding exercises to that workout and sets for those exercises. And I think it actually makes sense that when we're on the new workout page and we log a new workout, that we actually get navigated to the /dashboard/workout/workout ID page, where the user can then add sets and exercises to that workout. However, quickly before we implement the edit workout page in the next lecture, let's head on over back to VS Code, and we want to update our data mutations.md file. And we could do this via Claude, or we could simply add this in manually to our documentation file. So if we scroll up to the top of this file then, we can see this is actually a pretty large file. So I'm actually going to get Claude Code to add this into our data mutations documentation file. So let's add this in via a prompt then. I'm going to keep the same chat window here because the previous messages are still relevant to the rules I want to add into my data mutations documentation file. So let's say then, add into the docs/data mutations.md file. And we could tag this file if we wanted to, but Claude Code is going to know where to find this particular file. But let's say add into the docs/data mutations.md file a rule that says the redirect function should not be used within server actions. Redirects should instead be done client side after the call to a server action resolves. So let's hit enter on this prompt, and we can see Claude Code has read our data mutations documentation file. And we should be able to see, if we scroll up, all this green highlighted text here is everything that Claude Code has added into our data mutations file. So we can see here navigation and redirects. Server actions must not use the redirect function from next/navigation. Redirects should be handled client side after the server action resolves. So we can see here an incorrect way to implement the redirect. So of course this is within a server action, but then we have an example as well of the correct way to handle redirects, which is client side after the call to the server action resolves, and assuming as well that that call was successful. So like I mentioned, we still have a couple of loose ends we need to tie up, which don't worry, we are going to be doing this in a few lectures time. However, I want to move on to now implementing the edit workouts functionality, where we can add sets and exercises to a particular workout. And this is also going to be an introduction to custom slash commands within Claude Code. So we're going to take a look at all of this in the next lecture. And the way we're going to do this is via a custom slash command. So if we quickly head on over back to VS Code, if we divert our attention to the Claude terminal, if we hit slash on the keyboard, we can see we have available to us a bunch of different slash commands that we can use within Claude Code. So we can see we have a whole bunch of slash commands here, and we've already used a few of these slash commands throughout this course. However, we can also create our own custom slash commands, which essentially are shortcuts to trigger some stored prompts. So for example, if we find that we're repeating ourselves, having to type out the same prompt all the time, then we can simply store this in a custom slash command, so we don't have to continuously type out those prompts. Now, a really good example of this could be the tasks that we want Claude Code to accomplish right now. So the task we want Claude Code to accomplish right now is, of course, ideally we will push our new changes to our create workout page branch. And because we've concluded, for the most part, the create workout page feature, ideally we will then merge the create workout page into the main branch, and then create a new branch off of the main branch for our next feature. So we can continue working on our next feature, which of course will be the edit workouts page. So if we found ourselves continuously working from a branch, finishing the feature within that branch, one thing to then get Claude Code to merge that branch into the main branch and resolve any merge conflicts off the back of that merge, then create a new feature branch from the main branch for the next feature we want to implement. Instead of having to type this prompt out every single time, we could create a custom slash command for this. So to create a custom slash command is incredibly easy. Within our .claude directory, we first of all need to create a new directory called commands. Then any .md file that we add in the commands directory will automatically be picked up by Claude Code, where we can then run that particular custom slash command. So let's add a new file within our commands directory here. And I'm going to call this merge and create branch. So this needs to be a markdown file, so we need to call it merge and create branch.md. So within this MD file then, we just need to add our prompt. So our prompt is going to be something like where we want to get Claude Code to, first of all, commit the changes within this current branch. So let's say then, let's start typing this out. Commit any changes in the current branch and provide a suitable commit message based on the code changes. Then merge the current branch into the main branch and resolve any issues off the back of that merge. Then let's say we also want to create a new branch off of the main branch because we want to continue working on a new feature within our app. So then let's say, then create a new branch called, and this is the really cool thing with custom slash commands is we can actually provide arguments to these slash commands. So to reference any arguments that we pass to these custom slash commands, we can simply reference them with $ arguments, all in capital letters. So let's save this now then, and we should be able to see within our Claude Code terminal here, if we now hit / and we start typing the name of our custom slash command, it doesn't look like it's working just yet. So let's quit Claude Code and restart Claude Code. So let's close Claude Code by hitting Control and C twice in quick succession. Then let's fire up Claude Code again by typing Claude. So once we have a new Claude Code terminal, then let's try typing / again, followed by the name of our custom slash command. And there we go. We can see our custom slash command here. So let's also add an argument. So we're going to say merge and create branch here. Then we can add a space, followed by anything we want to pass as an argument to this custom slash command. So for example, if I added edit workout page as the argument to the merge and create branch custom slash command, then this string would be referenced in our prompt. So the final piece of our prompt would be then create a new branch called edit workout page. So this argument represents any arguments we pass to our custom slash command. Now, we're not just limited to one argument. We can pass multiple arguments if we wanted to. So if we hit another space here, we could pass another argument. So for example, we could pass test as well. So that would also be passed to our custom slash command, which in this context doesn't really make sense because the last part of our prompt would be then create a new branch called edit workout page test. So that wouldn't really make any sense. However, if we wanted to refer to each argument separately within our prompt, we can reference each argument by the argument number. So for example, if we also wanted to provide the branch to merge into, so for example, if we wanted commit any changes in the current branch and provide a suitable commit message based on the code changes, then merge the current branch into the, and let's say we wanted the branch name to be dynamic here, we could simply reference the first argument as 1. So let's say we had a dev branch. We could say then merge the current branch into the dev branch and resolve any issues off the back of that merge, then create a new branch called, followed by argument number 2, which would be the branch we want to create. So in this case then, our custom slash command, when we run our custom slash command, would look something like this. So we have our 2 arguments here. So the first argument to our merge and create branch is main. So main would be referenced by the $1 here. So we would say, then merge the current branch into the main branch and resolve any issues off the back of that merge, then create a new branch called edit workout page. So this is the really powerful thing with custom slash commands. If we find that we have a bunch of repeated prompts when working with Claude Code, we can add these into custom slash commands and provide arguments to those custom slash commands. So with that said, I'm going to save the merge and create branch.md file. Then let's see what actually happens when we hit enter on this merge and create branch custom slash command. So let's hit enter then on our new custom slash command. And perfect. It looks like Claude Code is going to commit the current changes, merge into main, and then create a new branch. So we can see here, Claude Code has recognized we're on the create workout page branch with several changes, including new UI components, etc., etc. So it's going to add those changes. Then it's going to commit with a suitable commit message based on those changes. And if we scroll down even further, we can see Claude Code is going to switch to the main branch and then merge the create workout page branch into the main branch. Then if we scroll down even further, we can see Claude Code will create a new branch called edit workout page. And as I'm explaining all of this, Claude Code has actually finished setting everything up. So we can see now we're already switched to the edit workout page branch. So if this was a common workflow for us, where we want to commit all of our changes with a relevant commit message based on those changes, then merge the current branch into the main branch or into any other branch, it doesn't particularly matter, but then also create a new branch to start working on a new feature, then a custom slash command is the perfect solution to implementing this. Rather than constantly typing out exactly the same prompt, we can store this within a custom slash command. So with that said, now that we actually have a new edit workout page branch, in the next lecture, we're going to start building out the functionality for the edit workout page /dashboard/workout/ followed by the workout ID. So it'll look something like this. It will look like /dashboard/workout/ and then we will have workout ID in here. So let's go ahead and implement this then. Let's head on back to VS Code, and within a new Claude Code terminal window, I'm just going to use the /clear command to clear any context from the previous lectures. Then we're in a good position to prompt Claude Code to implement our new page. So let's say then create a new page at /dashboard/workout/, and then let's put a placeholder here for the workout ID. Then we'll say this page will be the edit/update workout page. Now again, this may seem like a pretty generic prompt, but because we've already set up the foundations in our project with all of our documentation files, Claude Code should be able to implement this page without any issues. So as a quick reminder, if we didn't have these documentation files, and if we didn't inform Claude Code that these documentation files exist, and that Claude Code should follow all of the coding standards within our documentation files, then this pretty generic prompt here would absolutely not result in the code output that we expect for our particular project, where we're using Next.js, where we're using Shadcin UI for all of our components, and where we have our coding standards for our server actions and our data layer, and using Drizzle ORM to interact with our database. So I can almost guarantee that if we didn't have our documentation files, Claude Code would absolutely not output code that is suitable for our project. However, with that said, we do have our documentation files, so we can safely run a pretty generic prompt like this within Claude Code, and Claude Code should know how to implement this exact page with all the Shadcin UI components, with our server actions, our data layer, and our interactions with our database using Drizzle ORM. So with that said, let's hit enter on this prompt then. And we can see Claude Code is already starting to read our documentation files. We can see Claude Code is also referring to the new workout page to see how we've already implemented a route within our app and how we've already implemented server actions within our app. So as well as reading the documentation files, it's also referring to code previously written in our app to see how it can produce the best code output for our app. So with that said, if we scroll down, we do want to allow all edits in this session. So I'm going to select this second option here. And we should be able to see then, if we scroll up, we should be able to see that a new helper function has been added to the workouts.ts file within our data access layer. We can see it's the get workout by ID helper function. And we also have an update workout helper. So if we scroll down then, we should be able to see as well that Claude Code has created a new route available to us via this workout ID param. So if we open up our source app dashboard, and we have within our workout route this new workout ID route, and we can see Claude Code has already created the page.tsx component and the actions.ts file with the appropriate actions inside for our update workout page. So we can see here Claude Code is already finished, and we can see a nice summary here of the features that Claude Code has implemented. So we can see, if we scroll down here, we should have a form with validation using React Hook Form and SOD. Claude Code has pre-populated the form fields for the workout data. We have secure data access, which of course is incredibly important, where users can only edit their own workouts. We have proper error handling for loading and updating. We have loading states. We have navigation, where the user can cancel out of editing a particular workout. And I'm assuming this will redirect the user back to the dashboard page, but we'll see in a second now. And we also have a redirect after a successful update. We have Shadcin UI components. We have the server components pattern following the data fetching guidelines. And we have type safety with TypeScript throughout. So we can see as well that Claude Code also referred to the new workout page to see how that was implemented. and essentially copy the same patterns that it found in the new workout page. So as well as referring to our documentation files, Claude Code also referred to similar pieces of code and similar functionality throughout our app to see how that was implemented to also influence its output. However, with that said, let's take a quick look at this actions.ts file. And we should be able to see, if we scroll down here, we have the update workout action. And at first glance, it looks like Claude Code has implemented some deprecated functions from the Zod library. However, we will clean this up in a later lecture. But for now, let's scroll down. We can see we also have our protection. So we're making sure that, first of all, there is indeed a logged in user. If there is no logged in user, then we're just going to return early from this server action. However, if there is a logged in user, we're passing that user ID, first of all, grabbing the workout that we want to update. If that workout exists, then only then will we update that workout. So this is all looking pretty good. And if we scroll up to the top here to our update workout definition, we can see as well we have some nice type safety for our params. So we have our interface here for our update workout params. We have the workout ID, the name, and started at. And we can see we're using Zod to validate the name and the started at date. So this is all looking really good. We could review as well the page.tsx file. So this will be the UI that Claude Code has rendered for our edit workout page. We can see we have a form there. We can see if we scroll down to the markup, we have our Shadson UI form that is essentially a wrapper around React hook form. But we have our nice Shadson UI components all rendering as expected for this particular form where we can update our workout. So that said then, let's actually take a look in the browser to see if this all works. So let's create a new terminal window here, and I'm going to run npm run dev. Then let's head on over to the browser and let's navigate to localhost/dashboard. Let's click on through to a date where we know a workout is logged. Let's see if we can click on through to a particular workout. And it looks like at the moment that functionality doesn't exist. So we will tie up this loose end very soon. But for now, let's try and access a workout from the URL. So if we quickly head on over to our Neon database, I'm just going to grab a workout from the workouts table. So these are all workouts belonging to my particular user ID. So let's grab a workout ID from the workouts table. Then let's head on over back to the browser at localhost. Let's try and access that dashboard/workout/ followed by a workout ID. So let's hit enter on this and perfect. We can see we're loading the edit workout page. So we know that this exists. We can see that we're pre-populating the form fields with the workout name and the start time with the start date. However, it looks like we're getting a Next.js issue here. So let's open up our issues. And it looks like Claude Code has generated some slightly older code for our Next.js code base, specific to versions older than Next.js 15. But this is a Next.js 15 app. So it means now it's a very simple update. We just need to update our params to await because params is now a promise. So this is a very easy fix. So we may as well just copy this error message then, and let's head on back to Claude Code. Let's open up our Claude Code terminal window here, and let's paste in that error message. So it also makes sense that we add this to our documentation files, specifically where we need to get Claude Code to await params rather than referring to params directly. So just to reiterate, this is a Next.js 15 feature where it was a breaking change where we just need to await params rather than accessing params directly. So let's hit enter on this and Claude Code should fix this issue then. And while Claude Code is fixing this issue, we may as well start typing out our second prompt, which is to update the documentation files. So Claude Code will always await params because we're in a Next.js 15 project. So let's start typing this out then. And actually, the previous prompt is already finished, but we want to also tell Claude Code to update our docs. So let's say update the docs / and I don't think there's a suitable documentation file that we already have where we can add this rule in. So I think I'm going to create a new documentation file for this. So let's say create a new docs / and let's put server-components.md file outlining the coding standards for server components, specifically accessing params must be awaited because this is a Next.js 15 project where params have to be awaited. And let's just say, as it's a promise. So let's hit enter on this prompt then. And we can see Claude Code is going to create a new file at docs/server-components.md. So once Claude Code is finished then, let's open up our server components documentation file. And if we scroll down, we can see we're outlining the breaking changes in Next.js 15, where params and search params are now promises, and they must be awaited in server components. So if we scroll down, we can see a correct implementation pattern. And if we scroll down even further, we can also see an incorrect implementation pattern. So Claude Code originally implemented the incorrect way by accessing params directly. But if we scroll to the top here, we should be able to see this is the correct way, where we have to await params before we can access the properties on params. So with that said, now that we have our new server components documentation file, let's scroll down and open up our claude.md file, because we want to update our main Claude documentation file here. So let's add to our list of docs files the /docs/server-components.md file. Now, one quick thing to note here is, you may have already realized up until this point in the course, but guiding Claude Code to produce the best code output for our project is an iterative process. It's not just a one-time setup right at the start of our project, and then Claude Code will magically follow all of our coding standards throughout our app when we're building out features and things like that. Guiding Claude Code is an iterative process. So it's often going to be the case where we review our documentation files and we update or add to these documentation files whenever Claude Code is not really generating code which is suitable for our project. So very much is an iterative process, and there's very rarely a point that we get to when we're building with Claude Code where we don't need to update documentation files or we don't need to update the guidelines for Claude Code. This is an ongoing process to get the best results out of Claude Code. Now, with that said, this has been a pretty manual process so far. When we've created a new documentation file, we've been manually updating the claude.md file, specifically in the list of documentation files under the code generation guidelines. Now, it would be much easier if we create an automation around this. So whenever a new docs file is created, this documentation file will be automatically added to our list of documentation files in our claude.md file. So we're going to deviate slightly in the next lecture and create a Claude Code subagent to do exactly that. However, before we finish up this lecture, let's take a look in the browser to see if our edit workouts functionality is all working as expected. So let's head on over back to the browser then. Let's give our edit workout page a quick refresh. And perfect, it looks like we're not getting any errors now within Next.js. So let's update this workout then. I'm going to say example workout update in here. Let's hit update workout. We can see it looks like something happened. We got redirected back to the dashboard page. Now this workout was logged for the 26th of September. So if we navigate then to the 26th of September, we can see that this was the workout we updated, and the update did indeed work successfully. Now, of course, the UX throughout this app so far isn't exactly great. We haven't had any feedback displaying to the user to inform the user if their workout was created or updated successfully. And as well, if we update a particular workout, it would be nice if we got redirected back to the dashboard, but specifically to the date that that workout was either created or updated for. So for example, the workout that I just updated was logged for the 26th of September. So it would have been nice if we got redirected back to the dashboard, specifically loading the workouts logged for the 26th of September. And of course, as well, we have a bunch more loose ends to tie up in this app. For example, we can't yet click on through to a particular workout to load that workout within the browser. We have to navigate manually at the moment within the URL. And also, we have no way to add exercises or sets to a particular workout. So we're going to tackle all those loose ends in the next section. But in the next lecture, we're going to deviate slightly and create a custom subagent. So whenever we create a new documentation file off the back of a prompt, this will be automatically added within our claude.md file in our list of documentation files that Claude Code can reference. So we'll take a look at this in the next lecture before then moving on to tying up all of our loose ends within our app. In this particular lecture is First of all, we're going to create another custom slash command specifically to create a new documentation file within the docs directory. And then we're going to create a new subagent, which will be responsible for adding any newly created documentation files off the back of a prompt into the Claude.md file, specifically in the list of documentation files under the code generation guidelines section. So first of all, let's create a new custom slash command to create a documentation file. So within our .claude and commands directory, let's create a new file, and we're going to call it create docs.md. Then our prompt is going to be something like create a new documentation file at docs slash, then we're going to reference the first argument here with a $1, and we're going to append .md here. Then we're going to say to highlight the coding standards for this layer of the app. Specifically, the coding standards need to highlight, and then we're going to add our second argument here, which will be referenced by $2. So if we save this create docs custom slash command, again, we may need to rerun Claude for Claude Code to pick up that there is a new create docs slash command. However, let's try typing it now in Claude Code. Let's run /create, and it doesn't look like Claude Code has picked up this custom slash command. So let's rerun Claude Code then. Let's hit Control and C twice in quick succession to quit Claude Code. Then let's rerun Claude Code by typing Claude in the terminal and hitting enter. And now we should be able to see, if we hit slash on our keyboard, we can see this new custom slash command for create docs. So before we run this custom slash command, let's create our new subagent to add any new documentation files to our Claude.md file, specifically under the code generation guidelines section. So within our Claude Code terminal then, we want to run the /agents command. So let's hit enter on the /agents. We can see we don't have any custom agents just yet in our project. So the only option we see here is to create a new agent. So let's hit then create new agent. And we want to create the new agent specific to our project. So let's select option 1 here. Then we're going to use Claude to generate the agent for us. So let's select option 1. And all we need to do here is specify what the agent should do and when it should be used. We can see here, describe what this agent should do and when it should be used. So we want to say here, whenever a new file is added into the /docs directory, and actually let's say whenever a new documentation file is added into the /docs directory, update the Claude.md file to reference this new file within the list of documentation files under the, and let's put ## code generation guidelines section. So let's hit enter on this, and Claude Code should create our new subagent for us. But we also need to select various tools that this agent is able to access. So we could select all tools here. However, I don't think it's necessary for this particular agent to have access to all tools. For example, if we select the show advanced options here, we can see this full list of selected tools. If we select all tools, we can see this agent would have access to MCP servers as well as individual tools, which include things like web search and / commands and things like that. However, I don't think it's necessary to have all tools selected. So let's hide these advanced options here. And I'm going to deselect all tools. So let's hit enter on all tools. And the only tools I want this particular agent to have access to is the read-only tools and the editor tools. So now if we select show advanced options, we can see we only have a subset now of individual tools that are selected. And I can see here that the web search is still selected, We could turn this off if we wanted to. We can just simply navigate all the way down the list. If we open up our terminal window a bit bigger here, we could navigate to web search and hit enter to turn it on or off. However, I'm going to keep it on because it's included as part of the read-only and edit tools. So I'm going to keep web search enabled, but let's hide the advanced options then. So let's hit enter on hide advanced options. Then let's scroll up again using our arrows on our keyboard to hit continue. Then we can select the model which will run this particular agent. Now, in this particular case, it may be a good idea to use the haiku, or however you pronounce that, haiku or haiku. It may be a good idea to select this particular model because it's fast and efficient for simple tasks. And this particular subagent is a pretty simple subagent. It's just updating our claude.md file. However, if you weren't sure which model would be best to use for a particular agent, I highly recommend just sticking with this first option here, and that is the Claude Sonnet model. So it doesn't particularly matter in this particular case to create our subagent because it is a simple agent. It doesn't matter which model you're going to select here. However, if you're creating agents for other tasks and you're not sure which agent to use, I highly recommend just sticking with Claude Sonnet. So for the sake of this lecture, I'm just going to stick with Claude Sonnet here. So let's hit enter on Sonnet. Then we can select a color for our agent. So we'll see this within our terminal window whenever Claude Code runs this particular agent. So I'm going to select blue for the color here. Then we can see Claude Code has actually finished our new agent. We can, if we want to, modify this file. However, I'm not going to make any modifications to this particular file. I'm just going to keep the original generated subagent file that Claude Code has generated for us. So with that said, let's hit enter to save our new agent. And we should be able to see if we scroll to the top here, within our .claudes directory, we should see now a new agents directory and a reference to the MD file, which is the definition for our new subagent. So Claude Code has named this subagent a docs reference updater. And we can see within our markdown file here, we have some metadata. Specifically, we have a name for the subagent and the description. And based on this description, depending on what we run within a prompt, Claude Code will decide whether to use this particular subagent or not. So if we scroll down there, we can see the tools that this subagent has access to, the model that this agent is going to run with. So it's Sonnet team and the color that will be displayed in the terminal window. So we can manually update this if we want, or we could get Claude Code to update this if we want. So just because we've generated a subagent with Claude Code, it doesn't necessarily mean we can't edit this now. We can easily manually edit this because it's simply a markdown file. However, with that said then, based on this description, we can see this agent should be used when a new documentation file is added to the /docs directory, and the claude.md file needs to be updated to reference it. And then it's given some examples here. So now that we have our subagent, whenever we run the /docs custom / command, or whenever we generate a new documentation file, whether it's via the custom / command or just simply prompting Claude Code, then this subagent should run automatically. So let's test this out then. Let's hit escape on our keyboard here to navigate back to the main Claude Code terminal window. Then I'm going to run /clear, and then I'm going to close all of my open files here, just in case I pollute the context within Claude Code. However, now I want to run the new custom created docs / command, and I want to pass two arguments here. So the first argument is going to be the name for this documentation file, and I think it would be a good idea to include a routing documentation file within our docs directory, specifically outlining the routing structure within our app. For example, all workouts and things like that will be accessible via a /dashboard/ and then any subpaths or subroutes for our app. Additionally, we also want to make sure that the /dashboard page and any other subpages are protected routes. And we want to specifically note in our documentation file that route protection should be done within the Next.js middleware. So with that said, we want to create a new routing documentation file. So the first argument is just going to be simply routing here. Then if we hit Shift and Enter for a new line, we can type out the basis for this documentation file, and then all this remaining text will be inserted as argument 2 within our custom slash command. So if we quickly remind ourselves in the create docs slash command, any remaining text now within our custom slash command here will be added and referenced via $2 here. So this is everything we want to include in our documentation file. So that said, let's close this create docs.md file. Then let's type out our rules. So we're going to say all routes in this app should be accessed via slash dashboard. Let's also say the slash dashboard page and any sub pages should be protected routes that are only accessible by logged in users. Then we'll also say route protection should be done via the Next.js middleware. So what we expect to happen now is we should see a new routing.md file created in our docs directory, but also because we now have this new subagent, that subagent will update our Claude.md file, specifically referencing our routing.md documentation file. So with that said, let's hit enter on this prompt. And again, we want to allow all edits during this session, so let's hit enter on the second option here. And we can see Claude Code has created our new routing.md file, but also we can see now that Claude Code is automatically running the docs reference updater to update the Claude.md file with these new routing docs. So we should be able to see then as well, if we open up our Claude.md file, let's make this window a little bit bigger here. We can see under the code generation guidelines, this new routing.md file is now listed within our list of documentation files. So now that we've taken a look at some more advanced automations and workflows with Claude Code, in the next section, we're going to tie up all of our loose ends within our UI and UX throughout our app. But we're going to take a look at how we can tie up all of these loose ends by using GitHub Actions with Claude Code. So we'll take a look at even more advanced automations and workflows using GitHub Actions and Claude Code in the next lecture.